Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We are going to give people a couple minutes here to sign on, but we're going to start the webinar here in the next couple of minutes. So hang tight with us. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started here. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are going to kind of work our way through this presentation pretty quick. We'll probably go for 15, 20 minutes and then open it up to some questions and answers for anybody that has any questions they want to ask. To do that on your Zoom panel, there's a Q&A section where you can actually drop questions in there. So if you have questions, drop those in there as we go. And Katie is moderating and she'll feed us those questions there at the end. Also, just wanted to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. So we'll actually send out these slides and a recording of this webinar after the presentation today. And then we'll actually put together a handout that we'll follow up with next week that's got some more detail on some of the trends we're seeing and some of the Black Friday and holiday shopping projections that we're looking at. But we'll go ahead and roll into it. So essentially what we want to talk about today is Black Friday. So we want to look at what happened this Black Friday, what we saw, what the trends were, kind of where they're pointing, and then ultimately what we see for holiday shopping for 2020, certainly amidst the global pandemic that we're in. My name's Austin Farmer. I'm a project director here at the Retail Coach. I manage all of our projects in the Midwest and on the West Coast and a couple of other areas throughout the country. And I'm joined today by Caroline Harrelson, who is actually our retail recruitment specialist. So thanks, Caroline. Appreciate you jumping on.
Good morning. Thanks so much. I'm excited. I love to talk about shopping.
Yep. Awesome. Well, just so if you're new here, I know we have some people that are here for the first time. Wanted to give a quick highlight of the Retail Coach. So if you haven't interacted with us or don't know what we do, we essentially help communities identify new retail opportunities and then actively recruit those retailers for their communities. So we really come in and act as an extension of your economic development team, specifically focused on retail recruitment. And so we leverage our relationships with national site selectors, corporate brands, retailers, brokers, really to help you identify and bring in new retail to the community. Over the last 5 years, we've recruited 5+ million square foot of retail to new communities, which actually has led to $600 million in sales tax for those communities. And we've actually worked in 650 communities all over the US in across 38 states. And have had some success in communities and really helping identify, again, where there's retail potential, and then ultimately helping those communities and their staffs go and actually make those retail opportunities, realistic and get those retailers, site selectors, developers interested in the community. So if you have any questions about that after the webinar, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you, but I'll jump into some of the data and some of the trends for Black Friday. And one of the things that we saw, just the first trend that we noticed from this year's Black Friday and holiday shopping season, is that foot traffic's been down. So that's actually a theme that we've seen across the year in the midst of this pandemic and having lockdowns and really just across the board not being the best year for retail. One of the things we're seeing from our cell phone data is that foot traffic's been down for most of the year, right? In most communities, you're going to see a lag in the foot traffic from 2019 to 2020. Most of that is starting to rebound, and most communities are starting to see that foot traffic pick up. But we've seen a pretty significant dip, especially during Black Friday. So if we look at Thanksgiving and Black Friday for 2019 compared to 2020, there's been a significant dip in that foot traffic. So if you can see the chart here, we one of our data providers looked at the top 6 retailers and just compared to their foot traffic from last year for this year. And you can see most of them are down, especially on Thanksgiving Day. Some of these retailers were closed on Thanksgiving Day, so that led to some of the traffic being down. But Black Friday across the board, I think there was about an average of a 26% foot traffic decrease.
Austin,
So,
I think maybe we need to scroll down and see the next slide.
okay.
Yeah. Are we frozen?
I think we are. Let's see if
Oh,
I
no.
think my screen wasn't working there. Just a second.
It's okay. Welcome to 2020, you guys. There's always some kind of difficulty, right? And
Yep.
we're all having technical difficulties also.
There we go. I think we can see now. Is that better?
Here we go. Yep, you got it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. And Caroline, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, just in the conversations that you have with these retailers. I know that's something that you've been talking with a lot of their site and real estate teams about is foot traffic in 2019 or 2020 compared to last year. What have you been hearing from retailers, and what are their thoughts on foot traffic and some of the trends that they've seen?
Yeah, I mean, definitely retailers are completely aware that foot traffic is down, and it's certainly pushed many of them back on site selections for 2020 and for 2021. There was certainly a period where retail was just on hold in general this year, and so our site selectors weren't even. I mean, lockdown happened, and it happened for everyone, and so they weren't able to go and visit sites, and construction was halted, and different things were halted. And so some of the 2020 build outs were moved back to 2021. And then because sales were down, they're not able to build out as they'd hoped because some of the capital wasn't there. And so certainly it's affected the retailers. But I think that we're still starting to see some growth in the retail sector. We are certainly starting to see, thankfully, especially the end of the year. I mean, my email has really been filling up the last couple of weeks with site selectors who are moving and going and blowing and going again, and are ready to start looking, and are being told by corporate to start looking. And so I think that there are some positive trends for retail. As far as Black Friday goes, some ICSC research, which is a group that we are a member of, said that over Thanksgiving weekend, which was really the holiday shopping weekend from that Thursday to that Monday, so Thanksgiving to the following Monday, which was Black Friday through Cyber Monday, 194 million adults in the US did do some shopping of some sort. Now, obviously, some of that was Black Friday, some of that was Cyber Monday, but this is still a strong number because, just thinking about my family, my inner circle, some are shopping and some are still just hunkered down in quarantine. And so it's definitely positive to see that there was a strong number that was out. It is a lower number that we've seen in the past, but anyone getting out and shopping in brick and mortar right now is positive. About 54% of those 194 million consumers actually spent money in a physical store over the holiday. Obviously, that was down as predicted as well, but still positive that people are out. And, I think that that's realistic. I think that that's normal to expect. For me, I'm usually a Black Friday shopper. And this year, I didn't do anything on Black Friday because there was confusion about what stores were open, about if they were even having holiday sales, if they were, just trying to be business as normal, if it was going to be safe to go out, and if products were even going to be available. I heard on another webinar that I listened to with some CEOs of retail that they didn't know what their supply chain was going to be like. And moving forward, and we can talk about this in a few minutes, not to get away from the slide, but moving forward, I think that what we've seen trend-wise from 2020 is definitely going to affect retail. They were saying, they didn't want to have all this product stuck in their storeroom for the few weeks leading up to Black Friday because they didn't know how many consumers would be actually physically shopping on Black Friday. And so they didn't put as much product out. And moving forward, that'll probably be a trend that we'll see in 2021 and future years. So anyway, I think Black Friday, we did have some strong numbers. It was down as expected, but I think that retailers are definitely positive about what we were seeing, and I'm positive about it also.
Yeah. Well, and that is the flip side of this, right? So we look at this and we say, oh, foot traffic's down, then that means that retail sales are going to take a huge dip. This reminds me at the beginning of the pandemic when we were looking at fast casual restaurants. And at one point, McDonald's foot traffic was down 60%, but total revenue for the entire brand was only down about 20% for just because of pickup and delivery and drive through. And so I think what we're seeing a lot of, and what we see in the cell phone data is that just because that foot traffic is down doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a one-to-one correlation in the revenue dip, right? And so what we've seen is a lot of retailers adapting with online order, pickup in store, delivery from the store, different delivery merchants and online groups that do that. But one of the things we're seeing in the data is, despite that foot traffic being down, there's actually people staying longer in stores and having longer visits, and ultimately what they think is going to lead to bigger cart prices. So only going maybe to the store once and spending more, as opposed to going to the store a few times over the span of a couple of weeks. And so I think that's the positive for us there, is despite that foot traffic being down, there's still some really good markers of retail performance within that. And so I think that's a really good sign, because we look at the cell phone data because we think the foot traffic's important, but that doesn't always correlate with the actual sales. And I think it's encouraging. Caroline, you referenced a percentage of people that actually bought something in brick and mortar stores that this past season. What was that number again?
Well, the first statistic that I saw was 194 million people shopped over the Thanksgiving holiday. But I think 54% of those consumers actually spent money in the physical store. And, I have another statistic. I'll look to that in a minute and see what it was. But here we go. 80%, this is according to ICSC research also, 88% of those who bought goods over the holiday weekend spent at retailers that actually have a physical presence. And so maybe they bought Best Buy online, but Best Buy still has a brick and mortar store. And so people are still wanting, as it was pointed out to me, people are still wanting to shop at a store, even if they're shopping online, that has a physical presence, for a number of reasons. Number one, maybe they went in and just did a quick masked up trip to look at that laptop, to look at that printer, or to look at the different models and see in person. And then they went home, did a little bit more research and ordered for curbside pickup or for online shipping or whatever it may be. But another reason that people are wanting to shop at a store that has a physical presence, even if they're shopping online, is because the returns are so much easier as well. And so brick and mortar is certainly not dying. And again, I'll read that statistic again. 88% of those who bought goods over the holiday weekend spent their dollars at retailers that have physical presences. So I think that was positive as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we hear a lot, is this myth that e-commerce is overtaking brick and mortar retail. The most aggressive projections show that only about 30% of all retail goods are actually purchased online. And then when you look at the integration of online and offline shopping, most brick and mortar stores have done a really good job of integrating their stores with their online platform. And one of the things that we always say is clicks lead to bricks, right? I mean, ultimately, people still have a preference to either pick things up locally or go inside stores. So I think that's a huge thing to note here, is just because we've had a rough year with the pandemic and foot traffic is down, that doesn't necessarily mean that sales are going to dip a ton. And we'll actually talk a little bit here in a second about some projections that we're seeing for the rest of the holiday and kind of Christmas and holiday season. But I also think that translates to local retailers, because you're going to have a lot of people that aren't going to certain brick and mortar stores or aren't making as many trips to retail stores as they used to. And that may be because they're not wanting to be around a ton of people, or they're being a little bit more careful. And so we've seen, at least across the country, a boost in local businesses. And Caroline, I know you've been talking to some of the retailers and restaurants that we work with as well. And I think one of the things that's become a really hot point this year from a development perspective is everyone we've talked to in the fast casual segment or the food segment, or really in any retail category, has a huge focus on delivery and pickup. And I think that's something that we've seen kind of evolve out of the pandemic and out of that foot traffic issue, is everybody has to have that opportunity for pickup in store, delivery, to go windows. I know you've talked to a few recently. I think Panera Bread might be the one that comes to mind, that's their kind of new standard, is the pickup window as well.
So a couple notes on that. And one that I wanted to get back to, we had a question in the chat, if those numbers from holiday weekend shopping is based on the number of customers, so the actual foot traffic or the amount of sales. And that number, according to ICSC research, again, I'm not the researcher on this, but this is from statistics that we've read, that number is based on, that is the number of people who actually spent money. It's not the number of sales, and it's not the number of customers in store, but it's the number of Americans who actually spent money over that holiday weekend. And before we go any further, one thing that I wanted to point out also that I found super interesting when I was listening to some of this information, and regardless of what side of the political spectrum that you stood on around the election, it was pointed out that we were told for so many months by the media to beware of mail, and to be aware of if your mail would actually get to you in time because of the voting situation and whatnot. And so it was pointed out that a lot of Americans were wary of Cyber Monday shopping as well, or during the month of November period, they were wary of holiday shopping online or by mail because they were told so many times that there were delays in the mail. And now that we're a little bit past the election season, maybe not, but now that we're a little bit past that and we're not hearing about these mail-in problems, people are starting to have a little bit more confidence in the mail system. And so that was something that I wanted to point out, certainly. As far as foot traffic goes for local businesses, yes, we are seeing more foot traffic in local businesses. And, whereas some people were not comfortable going to the larger big box stores on Black Friday to do that big box shopping and to be in those huge crowds, we did see Black Friday boost, I think, in some of the local businesses and local economies. Definitely, local businesses have taken advantage of social media, are using that to their advantage. For example, I have several children, and we have to do teacher gifts every year. And, I was asking them for a list of teachers, and my goodness, there were teachers that I didn't even know existed this year that they were mentioning that we had to buy gifts for. And I saw on a local Instagram story, a local business said, here's something that's perfect for teacher gifts, gave the price range. And I immediately picked up the phone and called and said, wrap as many as you have, and I'll come by and pick them up. And so just through that little social media tidbit, instead of going in and browsing Target and thinking, what on earth am I going to get for teachers this year? I used social media and local businesses to my advantage. And then I called, had them wrap everything. They brought them out to my car, and it was perfect. And so, I think that we're seeing a lot of that, which is wonderful for our local economies. And yeah, as Austin was asking a few minutes ago, excuse me, I promise I don't have COVID, but it's a webinar, so it'd be okay if I did. But anyways, Austin was asking earlier, yes, Panera Bread, even prior to the pandemic, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but most of their business had become third-party delivery, which is like Uber Eats and that sort of thing. Pickup windows was a big part of their delivery, and then catering, big part of their business, and then catering is a huge part of Panera's business also. And so they were already seeing pre-pandemic the scales tipping to where in store or in the restaurant, eating was not the majority of their sales. They were starting to see that tip. And so certainly now when site selectors are looking for restaurants, if a drive-through is not an option, then curbside pickup is definitely going to be a necessity for an option moving forward. We're also seeing the need for restaurants, even local businesses in main streets, to have some designated parking spots for those restaurants for curbside pickup. So if it's a downtown, obviously it's not so easy to just throw in a curbside window or to be able to pull up to the curb because there are only a given number of parking spots. But if communities can designate, and I know I'm not the first person to tell you guys this, but if communities can designate maybe 3 or 4 parking spots for every 20 to 30, then it's just somewhere where people can pull in, and everyone on that block, so to speak, all the retailers on that block can have a designated place for 10-minute parking only for their customers to pick up. So, that's definitely a trend that we're seeing, and I think it's something that will continue to be a trend that's going to lead us into the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to look at just a second the kind of post Black Friday rebound. But you mentioned a few things about main streets, and we're focused on the full spectrum of retail developments. So everything from large big box development all the way down to small mom and pop stores and Main Street, and really just focused on retail in general. And one of the things that we've seen in our client communities is we run a cell phone analysis, so we can track retail foot traffic to specific stores, or let's say a downtown area. We can geofence that and actually run that data and see what has been happening with visits, so we can see the trend lines for those visits. And this kind of struck me, this chart that we were looking at, this basically shows that there's been kind of a post Black Friday rebound, which I think is really good sign just in terms of people getting out there and shopping. But it also just shows that I think people have kind of extended Black Friday beyond that one day shopping event that it used to be, right? Everything seems to start earlier this year, and then it kind of tails on until you really get up to kind of the couple days before Christmas. But it's a good sign for us that we're seeing that rebound and some of that increased traffic on the Saturday and Sunday after Black Friday. And we've been seeing this from a downtown level. I was just looking at a report for a community that has a downtown that's probably about 20,000 population for the community. And they've seen a spike in the last few days after Black Friday as well. And I think we're going to see that across the board, in the sense that Black Friday isn't, as it traditionally was, a one-day shopping affair. I think it's going to be a 2 to 3 to 4 day shopping affair, kind of as we evolve with retail from here.
Yeah, Austin, on that note, I was speaking with one retailer who pointed out that in the past, Black Friday has kicked off the holiday shopping season. It was what signaled in our brains, holiday shopping is here. It's time to get going on it. And if you did your holiday shopping before Black Friday, it was like, whoa, who are you? You've got your Christmas shopping done. That never happens. But this year, holiday shopping has actually started much earlier. And there are a couple reasons why. One retailer was saying, around Halloween, most people are like, well, we're not celebrating Halloween in our neighborhood. Our kids aren't supposed to trick or treat this year. We're not buying costumes. So why not just go ahead and jump into holiday buying? Let's start thinking about, if our kids can't trick or treat, let's start thinking about what they may want for Christmas this year. And then Amazon Prime Day is usually in June or July, I think. But this year, Amazon Prime Day was in October. And so some people took advantage of Amazon Prime Day for early holiday shopping. So that kind of kicked off early holiday shopping and the shopping season for us this year. So by the time that Black Friday rolled around, people had already been thinking about holiday shopping a little bit. And it wasn't as much of a, yay, it's here, let's push this. And so on that note, for me, for example, I was saying, I'm usually a Black Friday and holiday weekend shopper. I didn't get it done then. And now Christmas is slowly sneaking up on me. And next week, I'm going to make a mad dash to the stores. And, I've been mad dashing some Amazon delivery lately because I'm behind on my Christmas shopping. And so Christmas shopping just this year, as you were just saying, started way earlier, and it's going to go way later, right up until, and, some people may even get some New Year's presents, I think. So, that's just the trend that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think a good note there, when we talk about Main Street retail and some of our smaller communities with downtowns, I think there's an opportunity for local businesses to capitalize off of that as well. And the first place that we start in our client communities is having consistent hours, right? So making sure that all of your downtown or Main Street retail merchants are consistently open, and that they're open at the right times. A lot of small businesses are only open from 8 or 9 to 5 or 6, right? So you might have someone open from 9 to 6. I think it's somewhere on the order of 65 to 70% of retail sales happen after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So anywhere from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night. And so really just focusing on, hey, if we're going to have a longer shopping season, let's make sure our merchants are all open at the same times, right? And that they're open at the right times. If someone comes downtown to shop on Saturday, they have an expectation that they can shop until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And so if stores are closing at 5 or 6 in the afternoon, they're going to miss a lot of that opportunity, and it's going to keep people from staying either downtown or in local merchants for as long as they might have if everyone was kind of centered around those hours and consistent around those hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry. Let me tell you one more thing that I found interesting, and this is going way back to when we were talking about retail sales projected for the year. Overall, this is not just holiday shopping, but it is frustrating. I know as a city employee, sometimes when you're thinking about your sales numbers and you're thinking, well, holiday shopping is going to be down, and we're losing these sales, so we're losing those tax dollars. Another, and I don't have the statistic, if someone is interested in this, they can ask in the chat and I'll look it up towards the end of the webinar. But another thing that I was told is we are still going to have solid sales this year. We are seeing at least a 1% growth year over year. I think it was like 1.6 or something percent growth retail sale year over year. And where that's coming from is while everything else was shut down, our grocery stores obviously went through the roof in sales. Home improvement, your Lowe's, your just local home improvement and building supply stores, Home Depot and that sort of thing. Everyone was quarantined, and so they wanted some new projects to do, or their wife was making them do some new projects. Another reason that was pointed out to me was because we had a historic hurricane season, and so a lot of people really had to put some money into fixing some of those damages. And so home improvement went through the roof. There were a lot of other sectors, office sales, for example, because people suddenly had to make home offices and purchase that equipment to do home. And then another big ticket item was home fitness centers. Just scroll through your social media and see how many people have bought a Peloton bicycle system lately. People weren't able to go to the gym. They were sitting there gaining the quarantine 20, as it's called. And so, or COVID-19, quarantine 19, whatever you want to call it. And so they were buying high-end fitness centers. Those are tax dollars that were being spent. And so I think that we are seeing positive sales. Don't get too down in the dumps about what your retail sales are going to be projected for the year.
yeah, and that's where I wanted to kind of transition to what are we seeing for the holiday season, and we'll follow up with some detailed handouts with some additional data. We wanted to stay a little high level today, but really wanted to kind of end on this note that holiday sales. This is from the National Retail Federation, but holiday sales are projected to rise anywhere from 3.6 to 5.2% despite the pandemic. And Caroline, to a lot of your points, that's going to be in a lot of certain industries or certain retail segments because they've been doing well throughout the pandemic. A lot are starting to see a significant rebound as well. But I think, we look at it and we say, man, the year was lost, right? It's kind of like, okay, everyone will write 2020 off. But I think there's actually a lot of winners in that retail category and in that retail segment that are going to come out stronger. And so as a community, when we're talking to communities, the question is always, okay, great. That's great that retail sales are going to grow by that much. How do we take advantage of that? What does that mean for us as a community? And the way that we're looking at 2021 and what Caroline and I have been doing the last couple of weeks with our clients is really looking at, okay, what does our first quarter strategy look like for retail recruitment? And so if you're a community and you've got grocery opportunity, you've got home goods, home improvement opportunities, or any of those really kind of top 7 or 8 segments.
Yeah, even just dollar store.
Dollar stores have done really well. I mean, there's a lot of retail segments that you don't hear about as much that are doing really well. And I think even fast casual, the biggest dip that we saw in the kind of retail fast food space was really kind of that March to August timeframe. And so I think we're seeing a lot of that come back too. So we've actually talked to a lot of retailers and corporate real estate teams that have told us that they're still planning for their 2021 growth and they're still expecting to open a lot of new stores. So I think that's where, we look at, okay, just because foot traffic's down, just because everyone kind of had to adapt to the pandemic and what was happening, we're still seeing positive growth. Granted, that's not going to be across the board, right? There's going to be a lot of retailers that don't survive the pandemic. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of movie theaters that don't look like they're going to survive the pandemic. A lot of those legacy retailers, some of the big box stores that were already teetering, I think they kind of got the nail in the coffin. So we'll see a lot of them go. But I do think we'll come into the first quarter off of positive sales from the holiday, looking at a more optimistic retail environment.
Yeah, Austin, on that note, just speaking of fast casual, I remember reading an article early on in the pandemic that coffee places like Starbucks obviously were not doing as well in the beginning of the pandemic because people weren't driving into the office. And so they weren't grabbing that daily coffee on their commute. And so their sales really hurt. But I was speaking with a coffee franchise company. It was not Starbucks, but I'm sure based on my local Starbucks line that Starbucks is having this same experience now. But even if things aren't open entirely, this local coffee franchise company was telling me that their sales starting maybe like July to August started going through the roof. And they actually even had more potential franchisees come to them wanting to open a place, because the reason that their sales were going through the roof is because people were now quarantined and tired of being at home. And so they would load their kids up in the car and be like, let's go get an iced mocha latte, and it's your treat and it's my treat because I need a little something, and get a cake pop. And I know I'm making Starbucks references, that's where my brain is, but anyway, we're seeing positives out of all of this, and American consumers are finding ways to spend tax dollars, and so I think that's really positive.
Well, and that's the same, when we were talking about this webinar, it was like, oh, we don't want to talk through 50 pages of charts because everyone has Zoom fatigue, and everyone's kind of living this Groundhog Day where everyone's on Zoom and webinars all day. And I think you're seeing that too, like you said, in the just physical retail environment. You have people that are itching to go out and do something, itching to go to a store, just to even go buy certain types of foods or go experience things they haven't in a while. So I think we'll see the full resurgence of that in 2021, barring some crazy additional COVID outbreak or anything that's unanticipated. But I think we're in a positive place. We've, as a company, and Caroline, I know you can testify to this, we've got the most feedback that we have from retailers in years, and it seems like most retailers are receptive and open and still looking at those markets. So we're optimistic, albeit cautiously optimistic, going into 2021. Certainly if these holiday sales numbers ring true, and even though that foot traffic's down, if retailers see that jolt and that positive growth in that 3 to 5% range, I think 2021 is certainly looking a lot better than 2020 for sure.
Yeah, I think so. And, just in this last stretch before holiday shopping, I always like personal examples, and I'll give you a personal example of mine as well. My parents, were total quarantine. Someone saw my mom at a local Lowe's during lockdown and told me she looked like she was going into Desert Storm, because she had on like triple mask, and she had on a hat and sunglasses and like long clothing and gloves, and that was her MO during the beginning of lockdown. And then the last few months, my parents have really started coming out again and doing everything and being social, and they've had much more of a social life than I have. But just with this new wave that we're seeing of the virus, there are several people that are close to my family that are in the hospital with COVID, and it's really started to scare my parents again. And so just this week, my parents have started to scale back. And so on that note, my mom came over yesterday and she said, I've got a lot of holiday shopping left, and I thought I was going to be able to get out this week and do it, but now I'm really scared to do it. And she said, can we just sit down and you help me order some things for grandchildren and neighbors and all that? And so as we were ordering, I said, oh, that's usually more than you spend for cousin so-and-so. And she was like, at this point, I don't care how much I'm spending. I just want to make sure that it gets in time. And so I think that that's a positive too, of even though some are going to be more scared to get out as we're seeing these waves surge, they're still wanting to make sure that their family knows that they're remembering them, and they're going to spend extra on shipping, and they're going to spend extra maybe on the gift just to do whatever it takes. So, maybe to the detriment of my mom's wallet, but to the, positive of holiday shopping and holiday sales, I think that that's something else that's going to feed into this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to flip over here. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat while we're going through this last little segment, and we'll get to as many as we can. But I wanted to kind of just take a practical approach. So most of our audience is economic development directors, city managers, people that are in the economic development world. And, we get a lot of questions from a practical sense of, okay, what do we need to do going into 2021? And I think it varies by most communities. I live in a city just outside of Austin, Texas. And, we're retail heavy. Our city budget is 96% funded by retail sales tax, which is astronomical. And so, what we're doing with the community is we're focusing on, okay, where do we have vulnerabilities? What retail sectors are we weak in? What space do we have available? Who do we know that might not be in the market in a year's time? And putting together a strategy for, hey, here's how we can focus on where there's retail opportunity, not only just in a COVID world, but in that post-COVID world, based on who's doing what retailers are actively moving, what segments are strong. So really kind of being ready to anticipate that. Same with communities that have a lot of land available for development. Caroline, you and I have been on a few calls the past couple of weeks about some new development projects in land-heavy communities. I think the same is true there. You know, we're not seeing the same types of big box developments that we saw a decade ago, but there are a lot of retailers in that mid-tier market, that TJ Maxx's of the world, that are still doing 20, 30, 40,000 square foot retail spaces and looking for inline centers. And so that's what we've been encouraging communities to do is just, you know, be honest and realistic about what your retail market looks like right now. Put together a game plan. So have some thoughts or strategy around what happens if we lose these retailers, or, okay, we know we've got gaps in these segments. How do we go attack these segments while they're doing well? So, you know, if that's grocery opportunity, home improvement, you know, a lot of those categories we talked about. And then the next one is just being active. So 80% of what we do is active recruitment. So Caroline and I on the phone with retailers, with brokers, with site selectors. So really just, even if it's on your own, you know, you don't have to hire us to do that, but reaching out, setting meetings, going to the International Council of Shopping Centers, you know, all of the things that you can do on the back end to just put yourself in a better position despite what happens with COVID. And that's for communities that are looking down the barrel of the gun and think they may lose a lot of retail, a lot of local businesses, all the way up to, you know, my community that doesn't have a ton of retail space available, but we're already accounting for that and we're looking to the future. So Caroline, anything you want to add just from practical perspective for communities?
Yeah, I mean, we're sitting here saying, oh, you know, you're going to see an increase in retail sales, and oh, it's not just grim and dim as an outlook. I do want to point out that I read an article the other day, and this was also reflected in an ICSC webinar that I was on, that we are going to see somewhere around 10,000 restaurants close, that's nationally, over the next 3 weeks. And so while we're sitting here saying, expect to see, you know, improvements in some places, and we know that sales tax may be up in these areas, we are still aware that restaurants are hurting. I saw on social media lately a restaurant that has multiple locations in a metro area that I usually shop in was closing 2 out of its 3 locations, and they posted and said, we just can't keep the doors open anymore, so we're having to combine our staff, and they'll all be at, you know, the initial location, and we're going to try to keep those doors open as long as we can. So, you know, I realize that that's still going to be an issue for many, and I don't by any means want to sweep that under the table. On the same webinar, they were asked what we can expect 2021 to look like, and they said, you know, in the short term, 2021 is going to be just retail sales, people getting out, people going into physical stores. It's going to look much like what 2020 has looked like in the end of 2020 while the vaccine is being rolled out. And you can do your own research on the vaccine rollouts and the phases of that and whether or not you're going to get it and that sort of thing. But, you know, there is hope now that we do have the vaccine, and we've seen the vaccine start to be given to people and the first dose is given out. But, you know, in the short term, we are going to see a lot of what this year's looked like. Another point to make is that in January, we usually see those articles come out of store closures. That's typically when store closures are announced. People are looking at their end of the year things and just saying, you know, we just can't do this anymore. And, you know, that's when our Kmarts were announced and our Sears were announced that they were closing. So still expect to see a lot of those. It doesn't change anything from our perspective. We've been talking to those retailers, and we've heard from them since July that they've been on hold. We've heard from them maybe since last February, even before the pandemic, that their sales weren't really strong. And so the ones who already were failing with the times, I think, are the ones that we're going to see close in January. And certainly you're going to see those articles, and please don't be too discouraged when you see those, because I think that so many retailers are learning and are growing through this pandemic and are learning how to really evolve. And the retailers that are evolving are the retailers that we're going to see continue to grow moving forward. So,
yeah, and I think that's a great point, Caroline. You know, the reason we're cautiously optimistic is because we've had conversations with a lot of these retailers that were slated to add 200, 300 new locations that have essentially said, hey, those are all still happening. The timeline just looks different. They may be pushed back 3 months, 6 months, even 12 months, but actively recruiting despite that, because what we see in our industry so much is, Caroline and I will have conversations with retailers for a year. And for a year, we'll just hear, no, market's not ready, no. But then all of a sudden, 14 months later, after, even just a couple months later, all of a sudden their strategy shifted or they're ready to start expanding. And because we've been on their radar, all of a sudden that no becomes a yes. And then they're looking for sites in the market, or they end up coming to a site that we had given them 12 months ago. And so even if it feels utterly defeating and you keep getting no's from them, it really does make a difference. Not only just being on their radar, having those connections, but if you stay in front of these retailers and site selectors, they're going to pay attention to your community. That doesn't mean you're going to ultimately end up getting one, but we've seen no's become yeses more often than not.
Right. Yeah. Good information.
So one of the questions we got was, what can we as a community do to help some of our existing business owners? We can't just give them money. We can't bail them out. I think if we're talking in the sense of local business and downtown retail merchants, some of the biggest things that you can do are help them understand how people are shopping, when they're shopping. We have cell phone data that's helpful at doing that. Most of the time you can ask other retail merchants or some big box stores, but I'd encourage them to just look and see, okay, are you open while people are shopping? Are you open till 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, certainly during the holiday season? Are you using social media? Are you using a web presence? What can we do to help you do that? And then one of the biggest things and just tangible things that you mentioned, Caroline, is that parking. Just really being able to, whether if you have a town square or a downtown area or a kind of a main retail strip that you call your downtown area, those local merchants need dedicated parking for pickup and delivery. And if it's one per store, if it's 3 per block, if you can do that, I think that's going to help a lot, especially with some of that local traffic and some of the people that are looking to buy local but don't want to go into the store. I mean, there's a huge uptick in that. So that's what I would say, just practically speaking, is make sure they've got the resources, make sure they know that the hours they need to be open, who's coming, where they're coming from, and then those parking spaces are going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah, in the community where I live, they did a really good job this holiday season of, instead of doing their usual big Saturday or Sunday, I can't remember what it usually is, Christmas open house, where all of the local merchants are open for Christmas open house, and they have the crowds come into the stores and the promotions. They did it over maybe 2 or 3 weekends. And so it really worked out well for me, because my kids were in a soccer tournament, so I couldn't go on the day that it normally would have been, but they spaced it out so there would be fewer people in the store. And so I was able to take advantage of that. And so, if you are a local community, gosh, how many Sundays do we have until Christmas? Maybe 2. If you are a local community, maybe encourage being open from 2 to 4 for the next two Sundays, and make it a holiday Sunday kind of promotional event. One thing that the big box retailers were saying that I was listening to recently was promotions are big this year. Every online place is offering promotions. And, online you can shop around, you can look for the best price, but if you go to any website right now, you're going to see a coupon code across the top of the screen. Christmas 25, holiday 2020, whatever it may be, 25% off, 15% off. And so, make sure that your local merchants are aware of that. Encourage them to do some promotions of their own. Even if it's just, one item a day that they're putting on promotion, 15% off this item, make sure that they're aware that they may be beat out by the big boxes and online if they don't just do some smaller promotions just to get people into their store and really take advantage of social media and different things. So try to publish those holiday events, try to publish those and promote those hours, try to do some in-store promotions for your local merchants, and then definitely offer the holiday hours would be, my big suggestions.
Great. Next question we had come in was about specifically the retail categories, retail sectors that we see that are doing well. We can follow up with that with some data after this. So I'll follow up through email. But Caroline, I think just for me, anecdotally, and what we've seen through the data, it's the ones we've already mentioned, right? I think the biggest winners of the pandemic have been grocery stores. Most grocery chains we're aware of and communicate with are doing really well. Home improvement stores, not only just the big boxes, but your Ace and True Value Hardwares, your independent hardware stores have all been doing well. And then certain fast casual segments, and the ones that were quick to do the delivery and the catering and pickup. But any that I missed in there, Caroline, that you can think of in terms of where you've seen a lot of good traction or positive growth?
Yeah, I was scrolling through my notes. I mean, we're definitely starting to see upticks again in QSRs. And in just to go foods in general, anyone that's offering a family meal to go or something, because people are tired of cooking at home. The Container Store was saying on a recent webinar that their pandemic sales have shifted with the attitudes of American consumers. And so at first, the Container Store, which if you're not familiar with them, look them up, but the Container Store had a huge boost during initial lockdowns in kitchen organizing and then kitchen gadgets and whatnot, because people were home, they were cooking, they were wanting to organize their kitchen. And then that shifted because people got tired of cooking, and it went into some home improvement kind of organization type things. And then that shifted because everyone was working from home, and so it was off home office sales. And then that shifted into virtual school, because a lot of people were having to do virtual school. So making sure that your child was set up with desk and office supplies. And so anyway, all that to say, the Container Store has seen the mindset of American consumers change through what their top selling items have been. And I think that that's the same also with the restaurant industry and QSRs. Initially, everyone was cooking at home. Now, frankly, my kids are really tired of tacos and spaghetti. And so we are ordering out a lot more. We're picking up a lot more. And we're even going into restaurants a lot more right now, because we're fortunate that we're in a community where we're able to. And so I think that restaurants are starting to pick up again. And as we mentioned, building materials was big and stayed positive. Sporting goods and other hobbies. I mean, a lot of people picked up crafts. And so your Hobby Lobby and things saw increases in sales. And then grocery has exploded for obvious reasons. Another important thing that I saw was people are going to be spending more this holiday season because they had a significant growth in their savings accounts and the cash that they had on hand, simply because they weren't traveling during those summer holidays and taking those big family trips and the family reunions to get together. And so that money wasn't being spent. And so now, just to kind of make up for that, and I can attest to this, we want to kind of spoil our kids a little bit more, spoil our family a little bit more, because we weren't able to do it this summer. And so some of that money that was saved and kind of earmarked the first of the year for travel is being used on holiday sales this year. So I really think that's positive as well.
And I think a couple we missed, and you might have touched on briefly, but general merchandise stores, your Walmarts and Targets, and then warehouse stores. So your Costco, Sam's, BJ's Wholesale,
Absolutely.
they're all doing really well right now. So that's where I would focus. If you're a community and you're actively focused on retail recruitment, I'd focus on two areas coming into the first quarter of next year. I'd make sure that I have the right data. So whether that's cell phone data, updated retail trade area, gap analysis. And then if you're doing your own recruitment, really focusing on those categories where we see them leaning in and doing really well. But
yeah. Hey, Austin, to interject before we wrap up, another thing that we forgot to touch on was electronics. We've seen a huge boost in gains in electronic sectors this year. And again, I can personally attest to this because my family usually has some season football tickets to college events. This year, we opted out of our tickets just because we didn't know what football season would look like. And so instead, we got a huge TV to watch those events. And so that's what most people did. And it was pointed out to me by Best Buy and some of the other electronic places as well, is that people were at home, they were binge watching Netflix. They wanted to be able to see the sporting events since they couldn't go to them. And so electronics, TVs particularly, and then home office equipment like desktops, laptops, even standing work desk, which I know is not an electronic, but just anything that relates to electronics or making you more comfortable while you're doing your electronics was really through the roof this year. And I think also we saw a lot of gaming systems. I know, again, from personal shopping experience this Christmas season, that gaming systems and game consoles are sold out and really hard to find right now. And that was a trend throughout the pandemic, because people were kind of bored and wanting something to do. And so they went back to those old gaming habits. One final thing was bicycle sales, which this goes back to the kind of hobbies and physical fitness. But I'm not sure if any of you tried to find a bicycle during the pandemic, but they were sold out across the US. And bicycle places were saying, I mean, even Walmart was saying the day that they would get a shipment, they would be sold out within hours. And so, we're seeing sales in unusual categories this year, but we're excited to see those growths.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's a ton more data, and we'll follow up with the slides and this recording, this webinar, but we'll also put together a handout with some of this data, and we can, if anyone has any questions, Caroline and my email addresses are on the screen there. Feel free to reach out to us if you've got a question about any of the data, any trends we're seeing, anything specific to your community. We'd love to help you, but thanks so much for joining us. And, we would love to see you on the next one, but appreciate it.
Merry Christmas. Happy shopping.
Thanks, Caroline.